Auditing Professor Skye's Record Review, the always positive new music review show hosted by a French professor with some water on his shirt. And as this video goes through, you can watch it slowly dry. I'm going to be reviewing the Commentator Channel 2 by E-40, and I'm already going to tell you this video is going to do terribly. Why? Is it because the sound is going to be bad because I'm outside? No. Is it going to be because the lighting is bad because I'm outside? No, it's not going to do well because people don't care about E-40, and I don't understand why. My last video, I'll put a link up there, I really suggest you watch it. I go into depth about why E-40 should be considered a national treasure, like truly one of our greatest and most interesting original voices in all of hip-hop. He's been around for, as he says here, 5 decades, but somehow people just don't really seem to respond to his music. I think a part of the reason why is that he often just raps about selling drugs or doing crime or especially being a pimp in a way that's not particularly interesting. But his flow and the way that he creates words, I mean literally he creates words, right? He creates words and he has a flow that is completely unique. And he has a way of speaking, a vocabulary that is completely fascinating. That as a language professor, and if any of you are interested in language, every single track by E-40 is interesting and has some kind of linguistic play that makes it worth listening to. He is probably the most word-conscious rapper of all time. Like, what are words and how do they sound? Especially when they're said by him, with his bizarre Bay Area rap accent. I'm actually using a hammer to weigh down my notes. Speaking of Bay Area, please hammer, don't hurt them. So I talked in my last video about how probably my favorite line in rap history is from E-40's remix of Timing by Clips, in which he says, Dale Earnhardt Signature Edition, optional package. In my 2002 climate-controlled Monte Carlo bumping E-Water and fabulous. The way that he says that, I play that for my kids so much that my son came up with a joke. Every day, at 3:40 p.m., he says, "Up, it's E-40 o'clock," and we all get together and we sing about Dale Earnhardt Signature Edition optional package. That's just the example of the way that he's able to take seemingly meaningless words that have some vague meaning and put them together in a way that is unbelievably satisfying and ineffably artistic. Just like, how do you describe the beauty and the perfection of such a bizarre and meaningless sentence as Dale Earnhardt Signature Edition optional package? I don't know how, but E-40 does it. And every day at E-40 o'clock, we sing that song. So I just said that I've said multiple times that he isn't saying much. The reason why I want to come back to this video, even though the last time I did an E-40 video was the last time I've gotten under 100 views in like several months, but I don't care. I do this for the art, and I do this for the artists. And I do this because I try to make bigger points. And I've been talking about how there's this whole kind of post-punk thing going on here, but there's also a real thing happening in hip-hop. Without a doubt, hip-hop is getting way more socially conscious. And I don't mean just like over the span of a year. I mean over the span of 6 months. I mean since COVID. I mean since Black Lives Matter has exploded in the way that it has. It seems to me that we are definitely in the beginning of a very seismic shift in social consciousness of rappers. We might actually, I would argue thanks to Trump, ironically, be going back to the sort of pre-Reagan ideals of hip-hop. That hip-hop can be used to bring up the collective and to point out social injustice and to be a voice of the voiceless, as opposed to merely being a way for the voiceless to brag about how they found a voice, for the poor to brag about becoming rich. I think that we're going to be finding little hints here and there from new acts and from old acts, from established acts. We're going to start seeing the way that social consciousness is way more prevalent in modern hip-hop. And this Channel 2 of E-40's The Commentator is tangible proof of that. Channel 1 was mostly about flexing, mostly about crime. Very excellent, excellent album. I really enjoyed that. You can see that in my review. But this time, the entire album is basically dedicated to black pride, to, one might even say, actual black power, like actually going that far. And really, truly, it's a socially conscious album, to the point where E-40, the reason that I love him is his ability to create words and improbable rhymes and phrase things and have a flow that is totally unique. At times, quite often in this 16 minutes of music, he loses the flow completely. He gets so into what he's trying to say, talking about police brutality, talking about racial injustice, that he loses the flow, which, coming from a master like him, adds more impact. It actually makes it a more interesting album. It's better that he loses the flow, because somebody who's so in control of everything that he says starts to lose control over it. And that's what you hear on these 16 minutes. The album starts off with... I had to move the hammer. Please, hammer, don't hurt him. Could you please put in the comments if that's a funny joke? Make me feel better. So it opens up with the track, "The Funk Is Still Pending," which is a great example of the kind of sentences that E-40 can come up with, where I don't know what it means. The funk is still pending? What are you talking about, E-40? But it's a beautiful sentence. It's a sentence which will find its way into my vocabulary. I'm certain of it. The funk is still pending. I don't know. I don't know what that means, but it makes sense. It seems as though what he's talking about is, what is still pending is social equality, racial equality, equality in America. It's all built on an excellent West Coast beat. We're talking 808 drums all the way, the 808 chimes, dun dun dun. I think it's a cowbell is what it actually says on the drum machine. Really nice booming, sparse bass, just excellent. And this whole sentence that keeps repeating, it's not over, it's just beginning. The funk is still pending. It's ominous, the sense that whatever the funk is, it's not quite here yet. And a lot of these lyrics are really interesting. Like he says, I don't know where they get this rage from, but it has to come from somewhere. And he's talking about this racial inequality. And really what he's talking about is the far right. He's talking about these racists. And he's saying that the rage must come from somewhere, but he doesn't know where. Throughout this album, throughout this 16 minutes, we also get a lot of what I would say are okay Xer moments. Moments where he's sort of lamenting the state of young people. Like he says at one point, I don't know what's wrong with this generation. IG Live is their line of communication. So there is a little element of this, which I find a little bit regrettable, where he is saying that the young generation doesn't understand it. And I would actually argue that his generation is the generation that was much more complicit in the racial injustices, and that this upcoming generation, whether or not they're communicating through IG Live, is actually much more effective at confronting power. But we'll see. I don't know. That means that I'm less effective. So, and then he ends it. This is where I talk about him losing the plot. He starts talking about white-on-white crime and about how that's not reported because it doesn't fit the narrative, and it just feels like he's just losing it. Like he's not rhyming, he's just talking. The next track is called Goop, and this is a story. Unfortunately, it's not about Gwyneth Paltrow's beauty products. It starts off with like a story back and forth, and it actually kind of reminds me a little bit of the Mr. T video from the 80s where he's like telling these stories and he sounds kind of odd. He tells a story about the crappy criminal and the happy hustler. The crappy criminal was crappy at being a criminal, so he stayed crapping out, right? The happy hustler, the one that got in the game and got his money and got out. So it seems to be this whole song is about the way to be a successful criminal, but more importantly, the most clear sign of being a successful criminal is stopping being a successful criminal. He talks another great West Coast beat with the 808 going all the way through, and then he ends up talking a lot about his own relevancy. I've never been outdated, I've always been valid, it's impossible to last this long without talent. And then he makes a point, which is another one of these okay Xer points, which I think is a really good one. We went from idolizing the drug dealer to idolizing the drug addict. Is that not what has happened in hip-hop? That we don't really idolize the drug dealers, we idolize the people who are hooked. So we idolize Juice WRLD and Lil Pump and Lil Pup and all these other things that I could say that make me sound like an old man. That's, people who are addicted to Xanax or whatever, those are the people that we want, not so much the dealers. Of course, we shouldn't be celebrating either of them, but that's neither here nor there. But then at the end he says, for 3 or 4 years worth of timing and grinding ain't worth 30 years in prison. So just talking about the inefficiency of crime, and really actually after being a rapper who raps a lot about how great it is to be a criminal, he's saying it just doesn't add up. And also interesting, he replaces the N-word with ninja throughout this whole album, which I think is a positive sign. The next track, Black is Beautiful, is the reason I wanted to review this album. I'm telling you, rap is getting militant, and it's going to go from the bottom to the top. By this time next year, there will be articles upon articles upon articles about 2020 was the year that rap got militant. Now, I don't mean got militant again. It might be militant for the first time, truly. It starts off with the Malcolm X opening, a whole quote, but then the song has a sample, and I actually tracked down the sample. The sample is someone saying over and over, a group of people singing, "Black is beautiful, set our warriors free." And I tracked it down, and this was actually a Black Panther rally on August 26th, 1968, at the Oakland Alameda Courthouse, which is not far away from Vallejo, where E-40 grew up, right? And so this was a Black Panthers rally about freeing Huey Newton. And if you listen to the original, they actually shout, "Free Huey," in between. "Black is beautiful, free Huey, set our warriors free, free Huey." But in this, E-40 replaces "Free Huey" with just him repeating what is sung. And here it is very clearly, this real rise of an actual Black Power movement in hip-hop. And the things that he says, too, is that he says it in such an interesting way. Okay, so listen to his argumentation here. "We, the most forgiving human beings on the planet," I think is a beautiful way of putting it. Just, we, the most forgiving human beings on the planet. They raped the men in our family in front of our wives, tried to make us look weak in front of our kids, dehumanize. And our leadership, hella devil sent, got into the White House by trolling our only Black president. Evil, evil, evil. Brainwashed our people. Say, what Obama do for Black people? So he's just going to this simple fact of much of the rise of Trump came from trolling Obama and just putting it out there and calling it evil. It's all part of this bizarrely positive, revolutionary E-40 album. A rapper who we mostly know for inventing words like popo and popularizing terms like cheese and popularizing, odd ways of talking, All of a sudden, here he is, Black is Beautiful, quoting the Black Panthers and Malcolm X in the same song. Something is happening. The next track is called Slices. It's goofy. People want to know the definition of slices. He just goes through a whole bunch of numbers. It almost reminds me of that What Are Magnets song by Insane Clown Posse. He's just like listing off things, how many seconds are in a day, 4 edges to a rectangle, 1,500 active volcanoes. Not really any point to the song, but it's kind of fun. It just kind of fills it out. I would say the first 3 tracks of this album are just absolute must-listens, and then the last 2 are just okay. The final track is called Born In It. It's kind of a catchy pop song. That's not bad, but it's good. Okay, so there you go. That's what's happening with E-40. Statistically, few people are going to watch this. If you are one of those people who watched it, thank you. I guess if you like it or comment on it, more people are likely to watch it. But if you haven't given E-40 a shot, you really need to. Okay, I'm going to try to post this before E-40 o'clock. So until next time, for Buckminster Fuller and that bird, there's the camera.